By mid-1920, the British were facing a war unlike any they had fought before. Guerrilla attacks were increasing throughout the country. Dublin Castle was in disarray. The centuries-old policy of using Irish men to fight Irish rebels was reversed.
The local G division had been eliminated. New recruits coming from Belfast and elsewhere had been eliminated, and therefore there wasn't much of an option.
In the spring of 1920, the entire British administration is overhauled. A new political leadership is established at the castle, a new chief secretary with 3 high-flying assistants, Sir John Anderson, a man called Andy Cope, and another man called Mark Sturgis.
Sturgis arrives as part of seconded civil servants from London. Sturgis himself is gossipy, lively, entertaining, snobbish.
And on the other hand, there is Andy Cope.
His official position in the castle is assistant under secretary, but his real power far exceeded that.
We were greeted by an Englishman of tidy build, suave manners, and dressed in the height of fashion. This was Mr. Cope.
Gentlemen. Cope is a most interesting figure. He was head of the Customs and Excise Detectives and had a rough time. He's both very brave and very sensitive, an unnatural combination.
Throughout his time in the castle, Andy Cope would remain a mysterious figure, not least to his colleagues. Few knew the real reason he'd been sent to Dublin, to make contact with the IRA. One final new broom swept into the castle.
The Irishman, without any insult being intended, somewhat resembles a dog.
Chief of Intelligence, Ormond Winter.
And understands firm treatment.
Codename O.
O is a marvel. He looks like a wicked little white snake and can do everything. In India, they say he was tried for murder for a little escapade while doing Secret Service work.
Ormond Winter looks like he escaped from a Daphne du Maurier story. He's got a cigarette and a monocle. He looks a bit of a cad. He's an individual who is far more dangerous than he looks, however.
As Chief of Intelligence, he would take the offensive against the IRA.
Throughout 1920, the British piled on the pressure. Thousands of tough ex-soldiers were sent to Ireland to reinforce the police. They operated, however, outside the law.
What they were doing with the Black and Tan was to make Ireland a hell for rebels, as they said. What the British were engaged in was a conscious policy of frightfulness, as they called it. And Dublin was a place of horror then.
The atmosphere in Dublin was electric with tension and fear. Death stalked the streets.
The spy fever produced really a population-wide paranoia. You couldn't know whom you could trust.
The strain of working in operations in the city must have been extraordinary because you're between searches, does random searches.
Collins is living a high-pressure existence. He's making his way through roadblocks. He lives with the knowledge always that he's being hunted. The accumulated stress on him must have been considerable.
The hunt for Michael Collins sometimes assumed ludicrous proportions.
Collins has, they say, grown a beard.
Collins appeared to be in several different places simultaneously.
The army say they have caught at Longford a man they think is Michael Collins.
The bogeyman Collins really assumed fantastical proportions in their own mind.
There was a myth that the British didn't know what Collins looked like. They knew very well what he looked like. They had photographs of him. And it's also, of course, the famous film of him signing the Doyle loan. One might have thought that that would have made it very easy for the British search parties that teamed on the streets of Dublin to apprehend him, but it never happened.
They have not caught Michael Collins at Longford.
Collins' personal philosophy was that if you don't appear to be hiding, then nobody seeks you out.
He looked like, as Frank Thornton said, like a stockbroker. He was always well dressed, and he wore the right hat, and he walked well, and he wasn't skulking around. But would you pick up someone? You wouldn't, no.
It's an old IRA doctrine. The darkest place is under the light. Of course, the DMP knew him, but partly out of sympathy and very definitely partly out of fear. They were not giving him away.
The fact that he escaped consistently, occasionally almost miraculously, led some to suspect that there must be more to it than that.
The pace of killing increased. A civil servant was gunned down on a tram in broad daylight.
He was assassinated in Ballsbridge. Alan Bell was his name.
Bell had come close to uncovering a network of secret bank accounts controlled by Collins. His death showed no one was safe outside the castle.
Many civil servants simply had to be withdrawn into the castle for their own protection. Inevitably, that only heightened the sense of paranoia. Physically, the fact that you had to retreat into a castle, this is the 20th century, and you had to retreat into a castle for your own defense, was if like an emblem of just the difficulties that the British were having.
You have an all-pervasive sense of insecurity and fear. It's a bit like the green zone in Baghdad today.
The danger was omnipresent. Social life, you'd want to forget about it. You were taking a knife in your hands going to, say, the Gaiety Theatre.
The atmosphere becomes increasingly surreal.
Another poor devil has committed suicide in O's office. This will be the 5th. There seems to be a curse on this place.
The gradual sense that the more intelligence British agents had about this thing going nowhere.
If the great majority of these South Irishmen insist on self-government, then sooner or later they must have it.
The small group in the enclosed atmosphere of Dublin Castle must have realised that some sort of contact would have to be made.
The struggle for independence has a hidden history. While the war was at its height, key figures on each side were engaged in secret talks. For very different reasons, both the military and officials in the castle wanted to get Collins.
The British identified Collins as somebody who they could do business with, it seems, some point during 1920, precisely because they identified him roughly at that time as the individual who ran the military show.
It is reminiscent of our own time that you never talk to terrorists. That's exactly what happened during the recent troubles. But all the time, there was there were a number of back channels, but Cope would have been the most important one.
Of Andy Cope's work, we know paradoxically very little, and yet he is so crucially important. He's the man who has to deal with the underside of the opposition. Effectively, his job is to go and cozy up to Michael Collins, in a nutshell.
Cope, dressed in a natty grey suit, said in his usual flippant way,
I'm off to meet Michael Collins.
I said you were what?
I'm off to meet Michael Collins. I believe Collins is the man to contact first. So, I'm away out to look for him.